Welcome to Get Your House in Order, where the Medici brothers, investors and entrepreneurs, Cris Auditore and Dr. Philip Zimmerman, discuss timeless principles of success, significance and legacy. A podcast for business owners who want to design a beautiful life and a beautiful business. Sponsored by the one and only exclusive Medici community.
Welcome to the first episode of Get Your House in Order. I'm here with my brother from the same mother, the only one that I know of, Cris Auditore.
Oh, that's a good way to start a podcast if mom is listening.
Yes, if they want to tell us something, please later. It's the first episode of Get Your House in Order, where it's all about designing a beautiful life and a beautiful business. And we're going to start off. My brother had AI write a book, Get Your House in Order.
That's not true. That's not true. You're starting with a lot of lies here at the beginning.
Yes, we'll get into this. He actually did not, because I actually had to go on a trip with him for one of the research projects of writing this. But in this first episode, I thought we'll just hear a little bit of the backstory of why you got interested in Get Your House in Order, principles of success based on the life of Cosimo de Medici. So, Cris, just tell us a little bit about the background.
Well,
of
the
backstory
book is that I did not intend at all to write a book. And the whole theme just kind of emerged on me. I've always been fascinated about Florence. I've always loved the Italian culture and Italian language. And so a few years ago, I started studying Italian. So I just love the whole culture. As a family, you know, we often just jumped into a car when we were living in Frankfurt and just drove down all the way through the Swiss Alps into Italy. And there was always vacation. So I always had very positive associations of going down to Italy. And yeah, basically from my early teenage years on, I knew about the Medici family. And so then later on discovered, my passion for art history, started studying some art history. And then as part of that, I really learned a lot more. So that, there was no intention to write a book on this.
So tell us, for somebody who maybe did not pay as much attention as they should have in history class, who were the Medici family, and especially Cosimo de Medici, because that's what you focus on in the book.
Yeah, so the Medici family is basically Italy's most famous, most prominent family. They are called the Renaissance family. So for 300 years, they basically called the shots in Italy, in Florence and in Tuscany. But because they were very strategic in how they built out their influence, they really called the shots in Europe. They intermarried with the House of Spain, they intermarried with the House of France, and they just became incredibly popular. The most known thing about them is that they became the great patrons of the art. So if you know Michelangelo, if you know Leonardo da Vinci, Donatello, all these famous artists from the Renaissance period, well, the family behind all these artists that sponsored the artist was the Medici family. So my boys always call them the Ninja Turtles. They sponsored the Ninja Turtles, and yeah, so that's why they are known. But they worked themselves into the Catholic Church. They had 4 popes out of the Medici family. And if you've ever paid a visit to Florence and walked through the city, literally this city, the city of Florence, nowadays, which about 16 million people visit on an annual basis, is constructed during this 150 years while the Medici family was ruling in Florence and calling the shots there in the Signoria. And because of that, every church that you go to, every museum, the Palazzo Vecchio, everything that you kind of marvel at nowadays kind of has a story that goes back to the Medici family, how they financed it, how they created it, how they envisioned it. You know, most prominently the big cathedral in Florence that we all marvel at. Filippo Brunelleschi, the architect that put the cupola on top of that building, he was commissioned by the Medici family, and they actually paid for that. So yeah, they are the Renaissance family behind the city of Florence.
So we want to talk basically mainly to business owners, because that's kind of our community that we are involved in. And basically this was all paid for because they had a business. So the Medici Bank. Just give us a little bit of backstory of how they financed all of the transformation and impact and legacy that they actually had.
Well, so 100%, it's the Medici family started off as a business family. So later on, they went into politics and they went into the Catholic Church, but they were by far successful first as business people. So Giovanni de Medici started a bank called the Medici Bank, and his son Cosimo de Medici, that I wrote the book on, he made the bank successful. And the reason why this is important is they started off as cloth merchant. They were importing cloth from the east, exporting it to the west, and then they combined it with banking, and they set up this incredible banking empire all over Europe. In the 15th century, which is tremendous. If you think about it, before there were any trains, before there were any airplanes you could take, they literally set out bank branches all over Italy, so in Florence and in Milan and in Venice and in Rome. But then they branched out to France. They had branches in Avignon and then in Bruges, all the way up to London. So literally, they were kind of moving money and setting up their business power all over Europe. A lot of bankers that I talked to, kind of as part of their studies, they've come across the Medici family because two things are kind of very popular that kind of go back to the family. Number one, double entry bookkeeping. So they didn't invent double entry bookkeeping, but they really made it famous, and that's something we still use today in bookkeeping. Number one. Number two, the letter of credit. So they really made use of the letter of credit as they were exchanging money in different currencies, sending goods with money, and so a part of banking history goes back to the Medici family. That's why in Europe, basically every school child in a proper school and with good education learns about the Medici family.
Yeah, so this was not just a kind of a history lesson that you kind of got excited about. You actually start in the book talking about the story where you actually visited Florence, I think during COVID. And it was almost like a personal crisis, and out of that passion, and especially Cosimo and how he basically lived his life, not just his business but his whole life, you really wanted to go deeper into his story.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit of that trip to Florence that you took during COVID, and what happened just inside of you that made.
Yeah. So picture the most beautiful summer ever to visit Florence was in the year of 2020, when the world was on lockdown. There was a worldwide pandemic, which obviously was catastrophe for everyone. But it was actually the best time ever to take a trip down to Italy, because there were no Americans who could fly over. There were no Chinese people, and most of Europeans were scared to travel. So as a good entrepreneur myself, when everyone tells me go left, I go right, or the other way around. We're always a little bit counter the intuition. So we actually took a family vacation in the summer, July 2020, drove down, spent some time in Lago di Como up in northern Italy, went to Milan, then we actually went to Tuscany, went to the island of Elba, and then ended up in Florence. And we had a fantastic vacation on the outside. It was beautiful. We actually rode some bikes through Florence, which nowadays is very difficult with all the tourists coming. It's difficult to rent a bike. We had a family vacation, so I've got a wife, Andrea, and 3 boys, 3 teenagers, and we just had this phenomenal time in Florence. Now, on the outside, it was the ideal time to go on vacation. But on the inside, it was really a difficult time for me personally, and that's kind of that led me on this whole quest. So there had been a property deal that I had been working on for quite some time, and just a couple of weeks before we actually went on this vacation, it kind of fell through. That was devastating. Then number 2, I couldn't travel as normally, and everyone who knows me knows that I love to travel. I have a lot of projects, a lot of business around the world that I take care of, and so that actually affected me. I didn't have my normal rhythms, and I was not doing well. It was really a kind of a time of resetting, and so we're on this beautiful vacation. Everything looks perfect, but I found myself personally just in a difficult situation. Sometimes my wife would talk to me and I wouldn't listen, which happens more often than just on vacation. But I also was not very present with the family, which is one of the things that is devastating. You're actually especially on a nice vacation, you want to spend time with family, and then you can't pay attention. So I was in my mind, in my head, in my psyche, I was somewhere else. So literally in the middle of the night, downloaded a book onto my Kindle on the Medici family. And so I got up in the middle of the night. We were staying at this wonderful hotel there in Florence, and I started reading on the Medici family. I started reading on Cosimo because I thought, as I'm on vacation, I can educate myself a little bit further. And I'm reading about Cosimo de Medici. And really, as it kind of hit me like a hammer, that he was not just a successful business guy, but really someone that had the different spheres of influence in his life in order. And so later on, this is how this whole title came about, Get Your House in Order. I just felt that here's a man out of history that became incredibly successful. He probably was the wealthiest man in the 15th century. So I'd always put him in the corner just of business, that he's a successful business guy. But as I was reading the biography back then, I felt like, man, there's probably some stuff this guy can teach me that goes beyond business into the other areas of our lives. And so I just went on this search, reading more, learning more, and that kind of sparked this whole adventure of me really reading almost 70 books on the Medici family. And I've said this at the beginning. I had no intention of writing a book. This was not my thing. This was my hobby. I love history. I love reading. I can get a little bit nerdy when it comes to certain topics. I started studying art history, so I really was also looking at a lot of Renaissance art and these things. And then only later someone suggested that I should perhaps put this together into a format and invite other entrepreneurs and business families to kind of learn about this.
Well, the fascinating thing of studying Cosimo and his background is that what you mentioned, it's not just about success, to just build a successful business, but this idea of how you then live a life of significance, and out of that a life of legacy, that you actually, when you visit Florence, you realize that there is all kinds of things you still see. 60-70% of the city still goes back to the Medicis and how they influenced and the legacy and the art and all of the things that happened, which kind of makes us ask the question, okay, do we only live for our own success? Do we only live for making more money, being more successful, scaling bigger, more? Or is there this question of how a life of significance and of purpose and of impact that maybe will lead to a legacy can really be a different chapter or a new chapter in our lives? How did Cosimo and what you learned from him really inspired you to say, okay, this is not just about success, it's really about more?
Well, I would say that part of my quest is that I have 3 boys. I have 3 teenagers at home, and so part of our family story is that over the years of doing business and setting up a lot of projects around the world, there's something that we already have to steward as a family. There's some decisions we have to make on how do we pass this on, how do we involve the rest of the family as part of what we've already created. And so I have this question constantly in my mind: how do we manage all of this? And obviously, there are lots of leadership books you can read. There are lots of business books you can read nowadays on, with some principles. But I really found it very fascinating to study a person of history who's done it very well. And I think Cosimo de Medici is just someone who really has done it well. And even the fact that we talk about him now 500-600 years later is incredible. So obviously there's a legacy, but let me just kind of rewind. So he made the Medici family successful at the beginning. So he was really the first generation wealth creator. His dad started the bank, but he really kick-started this whole project of the Medici family of creating this legacy. But then they went down for 300 years. We have this storyline where him and his brother, Lorenzo was his brother, they basically for 300 years they created the influence that we know of. Now, then the line ended with Anna Maria Luisa de Medici in 1737. She died. She had no children. Her 3 brothers had no children. And then there was this incredible gift to the city of Florence where, on philanthropic purposes, it's just marvelous in history on how generous they were as a family. But then fast forward, nowadays, still people come to this city to study it. And so the question about legacy, what do you leave behind? What do you create now that has purpose beyond your own life, and not just for your children and grandchildren, but even perhaps for generations? This is a question that I have in my mind, because I want to lead a life of purpose. I want to lead a life of legacy. I want my family to be involved. For me, family is incredibly important. And even the fact that you and I, we've been working together for many, many years. We've set up all kinds of projects together, all kinds of businesses. We love this whole theme of working together and creating something as a family, but not just for ourselves. Yes. And this is really what I saw in Cosimo. Yes, he was extremely successful. The bank that they created, this was a cash flow positive business. They were pumping cash, these guys. But he did not stay just at making money at this level, which a lot of families do. And that's why no one knows them. This is why no one knows, a lot of rich families in history. They just accumulated a lot of wealth. And then that basically, we know 1 generation later, 2 generations later, maximum 3 generations later, it's gone. The grandchildren spend it all. Yeah. And so what I find interesting, and that's why I think there's something for us to learn, and that's why even we've gone into creating a Medici community for families, business owners, entrepreneurs to learn something, is really what are the lessons we can learn and adopt for ourselves. Now, they're not perfect. Now, and even I don't want to make Cosimo de Medici a saint. He definitely wasn't a saint. There's some controversial stuff that we even have to discuss. And obviously in the Medici family also, how they ruled later on, there were actually some tyrants as part of the family. So I would say some monarchs, they were really success, really got to their heads. So there's the good, the bad, and the ugly of the family. So I'm not glorifying kind of what they created as a family, but there are lessons for us to learn. And I'm always looking for lessons. Yeah. This is, I would say why, I've always been an avid reader. This is why we've always shared, the principles. We're looking for principles that help us set up our businesses, our family, our relationships, our legacy. We're looking for the principles.
Well, the way I explain it to people when they're interested in the Medici community is to say we really use kind of Cosimo as a case study. So it's not just say, oh, he's the new one to follow. It's like, no, let's learn something. Let's see what can we learn from him and how he set things up, and take what is good and leave out what is maybe not as great. Now, I love the title. It's also the title now of this podcast. Get your house in order.
Get your freaking house in order. Yeah, it's a slap in the face. I like it as well.
It's a slap in the face because we have worked with hundreds of business owners, also very successful business owners, that to the outside everything looks great because they're very successful in maybe one sphere of life. But then when you dig deeper and when the microphones are off, the cameras are off, you really hear that, oh, there is it maybe came with a price not worth paying because they ruined either their health, they ruined maybe their family, they ruined their integrity because of that drive to just be successful in one area. Now, I'm a big fan of being single-focused about really building something, scaling something, really being successful in something. But this idea that we need to get our whole house in order, and if there is one room where it starts, where things are rotten, it starts to smell, and the whole house is going to stink at some point. So just talk a little bit more about why you felt like Cosimo had really his house in order. And we will talk more about the 4 different houses. You in the book, you go through 4 different houses and different rooms in these houses, and which is fascinating way of kind of being in the footsteps of Cosimo. By the way, if anybody who is listening wants to get your house in order, you can go to just medicibook.com and you actually give it away for free, medicibook.com. But why the title, Get Your House in Order, and why is it important to you?
Well, I think you were already referencing it. For me, success really is not just on the business side. There are principles we need to follow in order to be successful. I mean, that's very clear. That's why, success doesn't happen by accident. It happens if you follow the right footsteps. And there are things we can learn in order to take these steps and be successful. But it must be more than just on the money side and just on the business side. You were mentioning the other spheres. One of the things that I did not know about is that Cosimo was a very relational person and that he really cared about his family. In fact, if you go nowadays to Palazzo Medici Riccardi, the family home that he built in Florence, is just down the street from the cathedral. You'll find that he very much on purpose designed this house for the family to get together and build relationships, and then that he loved to host people. There were popes and kings from afar there were business people there, and he invited them to stay at his place. And so it's very interesting. He's not the shrewd banker that is kind of distant, but he actually invited people to come and spend time with him, building relationships. In fact, in the afternoons, even for the simple people of the city, I call them simple because this is literally the translation from Italian, they had an hour where they could come and visit the richest guy in town at his house and have conversations. So he was a very relational person and building and setting up his relationships properly. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because I meet a lot of and have met a lot of business guys who are terrible at relationships. Now, and I'm not just meaning personal relationships with marriages or spouses. We all know that things can go wrong on that end as well. But also just business relationships. If you're building out your business, you can do that so that you build and accumulate friends over time, good relationships. Or you can have a graveyard full of relationships that have turned sour and things have gone wrong. Because something in business went wrong, you had the contracts, you start litigation. There are some business guys who have endless number of law cases where they're fighting over some issues, fighting over some contracts. And this is where I felt Cosimo really, he was a relationship person. Very much he was transactional. I mean, as a banker, you have to be transactional, but also relational. And so, in a sense, I think this is something that we should all strive for as business people, is that we over the course of time, we build good relationships. In fact, some of my best friends live all over the world. And I've, over years of doing business development, working on projects together, buying companies, setting up companies, I've developed some incredible relationships with people who live on the other side of the world. And I'm very proud of that. But I know it takes some time, some intentionality, some effort for me to develop these relationships and actually be true to them over the long haul. And so this is one of the things that I really admire about Cosimo.
Well, one good test of relationships is really to say, okay, if you get stranded in a foreign country, who can you call at 3 o'clock in the morning, where they would pick up and they would move heaven and earth to kind of help you.
And I've actually had this happen to me. Well, I needed some friends when I was stuck in Africa, in the Congo.
Yeah, so. Get your house in order. You mentioned it, Cosimo designed a whole place, and this idea of designing is really what we want to talk about, because I always say that as especially as Germans, we get a lot of holidays, a lot of vacation, and so Germans are great in really spending almost all year designing what their perfect vacation and their perfect holiday will look like in the summer. Even more than designing what their life should look like, what their family values and their family should look like. A lot of things what we also do in business, where we said, okay, we need to design our business in a way. We don't do it in other areas of our lives. So Cosimo will always come up, but it's broader than that. It's really about designing a life that you want to live, which is not an accident. You don't fall by accident into your beautiful life. You have to design it. You have to work on it. You have to make sure that you pay attention to the frictions that are happening so that you actually can improve and work on that.
And that's actually very difficult. I mean, specifically if you want to be successful with your business, it is really difficult to be at the same time looking at the other areas of your life. And I can speak out of my own experience. I have some regrets over the last 25 years of me, really getting, one house in order, my business, and really focusing on that, where I have some regrets now looking back, where there are some other areas where I did not pay attention. So in a sense, I don't want this book to also, or even the things that we talk about come across like we've figured it all out.
No.
I really don't feel like I've got it all figured out, but I want to have that conversation. I want to have that conversation, within the family. So you and I, we have the conversation. We have the conversation with our kids, with my kids, with our spouses, with our parents. We have that conversation all the time. How do we do this? How do we set the different things good? How do we set them up properly? And then we want to help others and invite other families and to have that conversation. Yeah. And I feel like I'm on a learning expedition here in a sense. I've got this incredible fortune that I am in conversation with a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs all over the world by now, and I'm learning every week. There are things I'm picking up, and so really we're creating a climate and designing our lives and to become beautiful, and our companies, and there are ways on how to do that, and there are ways on that don't work, and so that's what we're looking for here.
Well, I love that you mentioned that it's not easy because it's sometimes simple, but it's not easy. I mean, I know that so the difference between you and I is you started your family very early. You got married very early, and then when Carlos was born, how old were you?
I was 25, I think. Yeah.
25. Now Cris has 3 boys. They were called the German Mafia.
They are still called the German Mafia. Carlos, Alfonso, and Cedric. They are the German Mafia.
And I looked at it and I was like, wow, this is a lot of work.
It is.
And I wanted to enjoy my life. So I got actually married later. And my wife and I, we love our lives. We love traveling. We love, a beautiful life. And so the question was, do we actually want to mess this up?
With some kids.
With kids.
Yeah, they can mess you up. That's right.
But behind that story was to that struggle that I knew, when you're a little bit older, I knew what kind of a dad I want to be, how present I want to be. And I really had to discern, do I want to pay that price? Because I knew that if I want to be successful in the house of relationship when it comes to family and with my kids, that is a price, and it's not easy. To be successful in multiple areas. So by now I have 2 small children, and the verdict is still out how we will do. But it's in being intentional about designing and also learning about how not to do it and just improving it through conversation. Well, this wraps up the first episode. We will actually in the next one talk about the first house from Get Your House in Order. We'll go through the first 4 houses here, or the 4 houses, and then the different rooms as well. If you want to get the book, Get Your House in Order, medicibook.com. If you want to hear more, just subscribe wherever you can subscribe. But I'm happy and looking forward to see you in the next episode.